She tightened her rifle, calm and precise. A patch on her vest caught a general's eyes. Mocked and dismissed, they never knew. The Kraken's wrath was quietly brewing, too. Asterisk, before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you won't miss any of our thrilling stories. Now, let's get into the story. The morning sun had barely crested the low hills surrounding Fort Harrow, casting long shadows over the rows of barracks and training grounds. Private First Class Eliza Liz Mercer adjusted the strap of her tactical vest, the weight of her rifle pressing lightly against her shoulder. Most mornings were the same grueling drills, endless paperwork, the occasional sarcastic remark from superior officers. But Liz had learned to navigate them with quiet endurance. She had learned over the years that no matter how skilled or prepared she was, she would always be underestimated. Need a hand with that, little missy? A sneering voice cut across the courtyard. Liz looked up to see Sergeant Halvorsen, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl and a reputation for mocking anyone he thought didn't belong. He gestured toward her rifle, a hint of amusement in his cold eyes. "I've got it," she replied calmly, her voice steady despite the surge of irritation that flared inside her. "Oh, I'm sure you do," he said, shaking his head, his grin a sharp contrast to his rigid posture. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself, would we?" She ignored him, focusing on the meticulous alignment of the rifle's scope, checking the barrel, the trigger, the safety. Every detail mattered, and she had learned from experience that precision was her shield in a world that often underestimated her. Around her, the morning air hummed with activity. Recruits jogged in formation, the rhythmic clank of boots on pavement mixing with the low hum of conversations. But in the midst of the routine, a small group of her fellow soldiers had gathered nearby, whispering and glancing at her with expressions that were somewhere between curiosity and condescension. Liz had grown used to this. The whispers, the doubts, the subtle jabs, they were all part of the environment. But she carried a quiet pride, one that no sneer or whisper could diminish. Under her vest, hidden beneath the standard issue fabric, was a small patch she had sewn herself, the Kraken unit insignia. Only a handful of people at Fort Harrow knew what it meant. To the untrained eye, it was a decoration. To those in the no, it was a symbol of elite training, of courage in situations most soldiers wouldn't survive. As she tightened the final strap, adjusting her rifle for balance, she heard the sharp whistle of footsteps approaching. The commanding officer of the base, General Hawthorne, was known for his exacting standards and unforgiving demeanor. His gaze swept the courtyard like a hawk, assessing, judging. "Mercer," he called, his voice cutting through the morning. "Air. Step forward." Liz's heart didn't race. It never did. She squared her shoulders and walked forward, keeping her eyes level, her expression calm. Halvorsen smirked behind her, clearly expecting some kind of stumble, some hesitation. The general stopped a few feet away, his eyes narrowing slightly as they scanned her figure. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze flicked downward to the small patch on her vest. His lips tightened. "Is that the Kraken unit?" he asked, his voice low but sharp, carrying a note of surprise that immediately drew the attention of everyone nearby. Liz nodded, her posture unwavering. "Yes, sir. I completed the certification last year." For a moment, there was silence, a charged pause in the cool morning air. The recruits stopped their drills, eyes wide, whispering among themselves. Even Halvorsen's smirk faltered, his eyes betraying a hint of genuine shock. "You're aware," General Hawthorne said slowly, "that the Kraken unit isn't exactly a standard program. Participation is highly restricted, and not typically assigned to personnel with." His gaze flicked toward Halvorsen as if to let the sergeant's mocking doubts hang in the air. This kind of profile. Liz raised an eyebrow slightly, but did not respond. Her profile, she knew, had always worked against her. Young, female, relatively small frame, quiet. She had learned long ago that words didn't matter as much as action. She had trained harder, studied longer, and endured more than most would ever imagine. The general studied her for a long moment, the weight of his scrutiny heavy on her shoulders. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded once, sharply. "Follow me," he said. Dot, as she trailed behind him, her heart steady but alert, Liz realized that something significant was about to unfold. The weight of the patch on her vest felt heavier now, not because of its physical presence, but because it carried the acknowledgement she had long been denied, the recognition of skill, courage, and truth that had always been hers. Inside the general's office, the atmosphere was tense. Walls lined with commendations and military memorabilia reflected the seriousness of the man's career. He motioned for her to stand at attention. "Mercer," he began, his tone measured, "I've received reports of unusual activity near the southern training perimeter. We've had incidents, unexplained equipment failures, missing supplies, and odd, coded transmissions. I believe these may be connected to an external threat. I need someone with your specialized training." Liz felt a flicker of vindication. This was not just a routine assignment. It was recognition that her abilities were being called upon, that the very skills people had mocked were now urgently needed. "Yes, sir," she replied, voice firm. "Good," he said. "You'll operate under full discretion. No one is to know your involvement except for those I explicitly authorize. You will investigate, assess, and neutralize any threats." "Understood?" "Yes, sir." As she saluted and turned to leave, Halvorsen's voice rang out from the doorway, mocking and incredulous. "What's she doing?" "Going on some secret spy mission? This ought to be good." Liz ignored him, feeling a rare surge of satisfaction. For once, she didn't need to explain herself. Her actions would speak for her. And as she stepped toward the exit, the morning sun hitting her face, she felt the quiet thrill of purpose, the kind that only comes when someone finally sees your worth, even if it's just one person, even if it comes after years of being underestimated. Outside, the wind carried the scent of dew-soaked grass and machinery oil. Liz adjusted her rifle once more and took a deep breath. This was more than a mission. It was a proving ground, not just for her skills, but for her resilience, her courage, and the truth she had long been ready to show the world. And somewhere deep inside, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The southern perimeter of Fort Harrow was an expanse of scrubland and old training grounds, dotted with abandoned observation towers and rusting equipment. Liz parked her jeep near the edge of the perimeter, the engine's low rumble fading into the soft chirping of birds and the distant hum of military vehicles. She stepped out, adjusting her vest and checking the patch once more. The Kraken insignia gleamed faintly in the morning light, a reminder of the responsibilities she bore. This mission, though covert, was already testing her resolve. Unlike regular drills, this assignment required observation, deduction, and patience qualities that often went unnoticed in a base dominated by loud voices and rigid hierarchies. Liz had always been quiet, preferring to let her actions speak, and now she had the perfect opportunity to prove herself in a way no one could dismiss. Her first stop was the old radio tower at the far edge of the perimeter. Recent reports had indicated unusual transmissions originating from that area. As she approached, her senses sharpened. The subtle disturbances in the wind, the faint clicks of broken circuits, the smell of ozone from electrical sparks. She crouched low behind a rusted storage container, eyes scanning the tower and the surrounding brush. A shadow moved. Instinctively, Liz raised her rifle, the weight familiar and grounding in her hands. Her breath steady, she focused on the figure. Approaching the tower. It was a young man in civilian clothes, carrying what looked like a small electronic device. Liz's pulse quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. She had been trained for moments like this, where hesitation could cost everything. "Stop right there," she called, her voice firm and controlled. The man froze, his device dropping slightly in shock. He raised his hands, eyes wide, and Liz carefully stepped into view, rifle trained, but never threatening. "You're trespassing on a military installation," she said. "Explain yourself," the man stammered, trying to find words. I mean no harm. I need to see it. I have information about the transmissions." Liz studied him closely. His eyes were genuine, filled with fear and urgency. Something told her he wasn't just a random intruder. "Talk," she demanded over the next hour. He explained in rapid bursts. His name was Marcus Reed, a local engineer with a history of unauthorized experimentation on communication systems. He had stumbled onto signals that shouldn't exist, encrypted transmissions that seemed to originate from within the base itself. "I didn't want to come forward," he admitted, "because everyone would think I'm crazy. But something is going on. And it's dangerous." Liz listened, her mind racing. The puzzle pieces were forming, and each one only strengthened the sense that she had been right to insist on discretion. Her instincts had always told her there was more beneath the surface, that the quiet, small details others ignored were often the ones that mattered most. She escorted Marcus back to her jeep, keeping a careful watch for anyone observing them. The base's sprawling grounds made total privacy difficult, but Liz had learned to navigate shadows and silence. Once inside, she instructed Marcus to show her the recordings he had captured. Hours passed as they analyzed the data. The signals were complex, layered, and deliberately obfuscated. But Liz's training in the Kraken unit had given her an edge. She could see patterns others would miss, detect anomalies buried in noise. Slowly, the truth emerged. Someone within. Fort Harrow was using its resources for unauthorized operations, possibly putting lives at risk. Her anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. It was one thing to be underestimated. It was another to discover betrayal from within the very walls she had sworn to serve. But Liz knew she couldn't act rashly. Her next steps had to be precise, deliberate, and evidence-based. Late that evening, she returned to her barracks, the weight of responsibility pressing down. Most of her fellow soldiers were unaware of the gravity of what she had discovered. Some still whispered behind her back, mocking her quiet demeanor, calling her overcautious or naive. Halvorsen, in particular, had made a point of loudly questioning her abilities, dismissing her every accomplishment. Liz ignored them. She had learned the hard way that respect was earned, not given. And tonight, the truth was her weapon. That night, as she lay on her cot, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. Growing up in a small town not far from the base, she had always been determined to prove her worth in a world that expected women like her to stay on the sidelines. Every insult, every doubt, every mocking remark had fueled her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for recognition. She was fighting for justice, for the truth. For every time someone had assumed she was incapable, sleep came fitfully. Her mind replayed the day's discoveries, the faint outline of the intruder in the brush, the strange patterns in the signals, the sense of betrayal from within the base. Liz knew that tomorrow the real work would begin, uncovering the source of the transmissions, exposing the culprits, and ensuring that Fort Harrow remained a place of honor rather than secrecy and danger. Morning arrived, gray and misty, with a soft drizzle dampening the perimeter. Liz moved with purpose, each step a testament to her resilience. Marcus had agreed to cooperate fully, and together they started methodically tracing the signals. The work was painstaking, requiring patience, technical skill, and careful observation. Liz's mind was sharp, her instincts guiding her as much as her training. By midday, they had identified a cluster of equipment hidden near an abandoned storage shed. Liz's heart sank slightly. It was clear this wasn't just a small experiment gone wrong. Someone had set up a deliberate, clandestine operation. The risk to the base, to her fellow soldiers, and to herself was real. She took a deep breath, adjusting the Kraken patch on her vest. The emblem felt heavier now, not just as a symbol of honor, but as a reminder of her duty. Whoever was responsible, they had underestimated her. And that, Liz knew, would be their first mistake. Liz crouched behind a pile of rusted metal barrels, her rifle resting lightly against her shoulder, eyes scanning the area with the precision of someone who had been trained to notice every detail. Marcus Reed crouched beside her, clutching his notebook filled with technical schematics of the transmissions they had been tracing. The shed was quiet now, but silence, Liz knew, was rarely innocent. Someone's been careful, she muttered, mostly to herself. They know this perimeter is monitored. They wouldn't set up equipment like this without thinking ahead. Marcus nodded, a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. But why? What would they gain from intercepting or redirecting the base's communications? Liz didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced through possibilities. Espionage, theft of military technology, or an insider trying to manipulate information for personal gain. Each option carried risk, each option demanded caution. She adjusted her vest, feeling the Kraken unit patch against her chest, a constant reminder of her training and her resolve. First, she said finally, we observe. We don't engage unless we have to. If they notice us too soon, it's over. For hours, they hid in plain sight, the drizzle turning into a persistent rain that soaked through their jackets and ran down their sleeves. Liz's patience was tested, but she welcomed it. The Kraken training had taught her that calm endurance often won where aggression failed. Every noise, every shadow, every movement in the corner of her eye became a data point. By late afternoon, the first intruder appeared, a young officer, unfamiliar to Liz, moving with practiced caution. He didn't check in with base control. He brought tools, cables, and a small laptop, beginning to interface with the hidden equipment. Liz's pulse remained steady. She observed quietly, noting his methods, memorizing every detail. Good, Marcus whispered. Better than I expected. Liz shook her head slightly. Yes, but good doesn't mean invincible. Watch and learn. Hours passed. The rain had soaked through everything, turning the ground to mud, but Liz and Marcus remained undetected. When a second figure appeared, she recognized the subtle differences immediately, a slightly older man with an authoritative presence. That suggested experience and knowledge of the base's inner workings. Liz's heart clenched. An insider, someone with access, someone who should have been on their side. The realization hit her with a mix of anger and determination. They were exploiting the trust of everyone at Fort Harrow, using the base's resources for clandestine purposes, and they had underestimated her. This isn't just theft, she whispered to Marcus. It's betrayal. And betrayal is dangerous in a place like this. Marcus looked at her, eyes wide. Do you think the general knows? Liz shook her head. He doesn't, and until I can prove it, no one else will believe me. We'll need evidence, clear, undeniable evidence. As dusk approached, Liz made her move. She slipped from cover, careful to remain in the shadows, moving with the silent precision that had earned her the Kraken insignia. She approached the shed from the opposite side, keeping low, observing, calculating. Every step was deliberate. Every breath measured. Inside the shed, the two figures were unaware of her presence. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging technical jargon that Liz didn't fully understand, but could follow well enough to recognize patterns and intentions. The older man was giving instructions, the younger following orders, adjusting equipment and running checks. Liz's anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. These were people who had looked down on her, ignored her, doubted her competence, and now here they were, committing acts that could jeopardize lives. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her resolve solidifying. Suddenly, a loud clatter echoed from behind her. Marcus had dropped his notebook. Liz's heart leapt, but she didn't panic. The intruders reacted immediately, moving to investigate. Liz ducked into the shadows, pressing herself against the mud-slicked wall, willing herself to be invisible. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching endlessly. Liz could feel her pulse, steady but insistent, as if urging her to act. She knew that timing was everything. One wrong move could expose them, and failure was not an option. Finally, the intruders returned to their work, apparently convinced that the noise had been nothing. Liz exhaled silently, her nerves taut but controlled. She motioned to Marcus to stay put, and then slipped closer, taking photos and recording the equipment with her phone, every image a potential piece of irrefutable evidence. Hours passed in this dangerous rhythm. Liz's mind wandered briefly, reflecting on how far she had come. From the small town where she had been dismissed for being too timid, too soft, too young, to a soldier trusted by the general for a mission no one else could handle. She had faced mockery, derision, and constant underestimation, and yet here she was capable, prepared, and resolute. Finally, night fell completely, shrouding the perimeter in darkness. The intruders began packing up their equipment, preparing to leave. Liz knew the moment of confrontation had arrived. She stepped from the shadows, her rifle raised but not fired. "Step away from the equipment," she commanded, voice strong. Unwavering, the younger man froze, eyes wide. The older man turned sharply, recognition dawning as he took in her Kraken unit patch. "Mercer?" he said, disbelief and anger in his voice. "Yes," Liz said simply. "And you've underestimated me for the last time." The older man hesitated, calculating, and Liz seized the moment. She signaled Marcus to call the general with the evidence she had gathered, ensuring that no argument or deception could undo the proof. By the time Fort Harrow security arrived, summoned by Marcus, the intruders were detained, caught red-handed. The betrayal had been exposed, and Liz had done it without a single shot fired, relying entirely on skill, patience, and intellect. As she watched the men being escorted away, Halvorsen appeared behind her, expression a mix of astonishment and grudging respect. "Well, I didn't think you had it in you," he muttered. Liz didn't respond. She didn't need to. The general arrived moments later, his gaze meeting hers with a mixture of pride and acknowledgement. For the first time in her career, her quiet strength, her perseverance, and her courage were recognized openly, without doubt or sarcasm. And yet, Liz knew the work was far from over. Betrayal had been exposed, yes, but trust would take time to rebuild. And there were still unanswered questions. How deep did the conspiracy go? Who else was involved? And most importantly, how many more challenges lay ahead before justice was fully served? For now, though, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had faced the shadows, confronted the underestimated, and emerged victorious. The Kraken patch on her vest wasn't just a symbol, it was proof. Proof that courage, intelligence, and patience could triumph over mockery, doubt, and deception. The morning after the incident, Fort Harrow was buzzing with a mixture of shock and quiet admiration. Word of the apprehended intruders had spread quickly, though details remained classified. In the mess hall, soldiers whispered over trays of eggs and toast, glancing occasionally at Liz. Some looked skeptical, others impressed, but most were silent. The quiet acknowledgement of her skill, the subtle nods of respect from a few senior officers, felt different earned rather than granted. Liz, however, felt no triumph yet. The first layer of the threat had been neutralized, yes, but the unanswered questions gnawed at her. Who had ordered the operation? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, how many others in the base might be complicit? Her first stop that morning was the general's office. The Kraken patch on her vest still gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights, a quiet testament to the elite training she had endured. General Hawthorne looked up from his desk, reviewing the preliminary reports from security and intelligence. "Mercer," he said, his tone controlled but carrying the weight of trust. "You did more than I expected. But this is only the beginning. I want you to lead a small team, discreetly, to investigate further. We can't risk tipping off anyone who might be watching." "Yes, sir," Liz replied, her mind already mapping the steps ahead. The team was small, handpicked by the general himself, Marcus Reed, whose technical skills were invaluable, Lieutenant Harris, a cautious but capable communications officer, and Corporal Jensen, known for his sharp instincts and field experience. The dynamic was delicate. Liz had faced skepticism before, and now she was the one in charge. She could sense the subtle hesitations, the unspoken doubts from some team members, but she ignored them. Leadership, she knew, was about action, not reassurance. Their first task was to analyze the captured equipment and digital traces left behind by the intruders. In a secured lab, Liz reviewed the data meticulously. Lines of code, signal patterns, timestamps, all were pieces of a puzzle that demanded careful assembly. As she worked, Marcus whispered, "This isn't just espionage. Someone's diverting information from training simulations and communications exercises. It's almost recreational for them. A game," Liz frowned. "That makes it more dangerous. They're testing the system without concern for consequences. Someone who treats security like a game is willing to risk lives for amusement." Hours turned into days. Liz's emotional and physical stamina was tested as she delved deeper into the network of betrayal. Sleepless nights, endless lines of code, and repeated inspections of every transmission made her weary, but she refused to relent. Each discovery sharpened her resolve. Every subtle clue she uncovered was a step closer to exposing the full extent of the conspiracy. Meanwhile, the base's social environment offered its own challenges. Rumors swirled, some mocking, some admiring. Sergeant Halvorsen, still reeling from his earlier underestimation of her, approached her one afternoon in the training yard. "You're making it look easy," he said, his tone a mixture of sarcasm and grudging respect. "But don't think I'm convinced it'll last. People don't like being told they're wrong." Liz looked at him steadily, unflinching. "I don't need everyone to like it. I need everyone to do their duty. That's what matters." His smirk faltered. There was no bite in her words, only truth. And for the first time, Halvorsen paused, considering that maybe, just maybe, she was more capable than he had assumed. As Liz pressed on, she discovered a troubling pattern. The intruders had not acted alone. Someone high in the base hierarchy had provided access, cover, and technical knowledge. It was subtle, masked as routine authorizations, misfiled paperwork, and carefully worded orders, but the trail was there for those trained to see it. And Liz, with her Kraken instincts and patient determination, could see it. The realization hit her hard. Betrayal wasn't always obvious. It wasn't always the loud, clumsy actions of spies or saboteurs. Sometimes it came cloaked in authority, shielded by trust, hidden in plain sight. And that made it far more dangerous. Emotionally, Liz wrestled with the knowledge that someone she had to respect for their position might be actively undermining the base. Anger surged, but she tempered it with patience. She had learned the hard way that impulsive reactions could destroy both evidence and credibility. She had to be methodical. One evening, after a long day of analysis, she sat alone in the lab, staring at the screen displaying the flow of communications. Every fiber of her being urged her to confront the suspected officer immediately, to demand answers and justice. But she knew better. She needed incontrovertible proof. She needed a strategy. Marcus leaned over her shoulder. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said softly. "Even the Kraken can't see through exhaustion." Liz shook her head. "It's not just about me. Every mistake we've overlooked could cost someone their life. I can't afford to slow down now." The tension, the weight of responsibility, and the isolation began to take a toll. Yet, through it all, Liz remained resolute. Her emotional strength had always been quiet, internal, but now it became her anchor. She remembered the countless times she had been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated. Every slight, every sneer, every whispered doubt had prepared her for this moment. By the third week of the investigation, Liz's team had compiled enough evidence to identify the officer involved. It was someone highly respected, someone whose reputation had shielded them for years. The revelation sent a ripple of disbelief through the team. Marcus muttered, "I never would have guessed." Liz didn't flinch. That's the point. People hide behind reputations, but no one is untouchable when evidence speaks. The team devised a careful plan. They would present the evidence to the general, ensuring it was undeniable, comprehensive, and legally binding. Liz knew that this confrontation would test her resolve more than anything else so far. Exposing betrayal within the hierarchy carried risks, political, professional, and personal. But she also knew that justice demanded courage, patience, and strategy. As she prepared for the briefing, Liz paused in front of the mirror, adjusting her vest and the Kraken patch. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Every challenge she had faced, every insult endured, every doubt she had silenced through perseverance, all had led to this. She wasn't just fighting to expose wrongdoing. She was fighting for respect, for truth, and for the integrity of Fort Harrow itself. And she was ready. The morning of the briefing arrived gray and overcast, the clouds mirroring the tension building in Liz's chest. The general's office felt larger than usual, the walls lined with accolades, maps, and photographs that chronicled a lifetime of service. Today, those walls bore witness to a revelation that would shake Fort Harrow to its core. Liz stood at attention, her Kraken unit patch prominent on her vest, a silent declaration of skill, perseverance, and honor. Marcus, Lieutenant Harris, and Corporal Jensen were positioned discreetly behind her, each carrying pieces of the evidence they had meticulously gathered over weeks. The officer in question, Colonel Brandt, entered shortly thereafter. He was a figure of authority, confident and charismatic, a man whose reputation had long shielded him from scrutiny. He paused briefly when he saw Liz, an almost imperceptible flicker of recognition crossing his eyes, quickly replaced by a polite, commanding smile. "Colonel Brandt," General Hawthorne began, his tone measured but sharp, "we have reason to believe that unauthorized communications and equipment operations have been conducted under your oversight." Brandt's brow furrowed slightly. "General, I assure you—" "Please sit," Liz interrupted, her voice calm but unwavering. "I have the evidence, sir." She stepped forward, presenting her files, photos, and recordings. Each piece was precise, indisputable, and methodically organized. She watched Brandt's confident demeanor begin to crack as the evidence was revealed, the subtle tremor in his hands betraying the gravity of the situation. "You underestimated me," Liz said quietly, her tone carrying a weight that silenced even the general for a brief moment. "Not because I'm incapable, but because I refuse to conform to assumptions. You treated this base as a game, a playground for your experiments, without regard for the consequences. That ends now." The room was tense, every officer present aware of the significance. Brant's face turned pale, the first cracks in his carefully constructed armor appearing. He attempted to argue, to justify, to deflect blame, but each statement was met with counter-evidence, each explanation dismantled by facts that could not be ignored. Liz's mind remained focused, but internally, emotions churned. She remembered the countless times she had been dismissed, mocked, or doubted. The anger she felt toward Brant was not personal alone. It was an embodiment of every slight she had endured, every underestimation, every whispered doubt that her courage and high skill could never measure up. Yet she controlled it, channeling it into determination rather than rashness. Hours passed as the General Lees and the assembled officers dissected the operation. Every step, every action, every hidden communication line was accounted for. By the end, the truth was undeniable. Colonel Brant's deception had been exposed, his actions a direct violation of Fort Harrow's protocols and an endangerment of lives. The finality of the revelation settled in the room like a weight. Brant was escorted from the office under arrest, his authority stripped, and his reputation irreparably damaged. The silence that followed was profound, a mixture of relief, respect, and astonishment. Liz exhaled slowly, a mixture of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction washing over her. She had confronted authority, exposed betrayal, and demonstrated courage under pressure. But she also felt the emotional toll, the lingering sense of violation, the betrayal by someone entrusted with leadership, and the stark reminder of how easily trust could be exploited. General Hawthorne approached her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Private Mercer," he said, voice low but carrying genuine respect, "you've done more than protect this base. You've reminded everyone here what true courage and integrity look like. Your patience, your judgment, and your skill have earned more than recognition. They've earned trust." For the first time in her career, Liz felt the weight of that acknowledgement. It wasn't the fleeting praise of peers or the temporary respect of skeptics. It was a profound, earned validation of her perseverance, intelligence, and moral fortitude. Halvorsen, who had watched from the sidelines, approached quietly, his earlier smugness replaced by a tentative respect. You really did it," he admitted, almost grudgingly. "I thought this would be a mess. You handled it better than anyone could have imagined." Liz nodded once, a small smile crossing her face. "It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about doing what's right." In the following days, the base underwent thorough security reviews, and every layer of the operation Colonel Brant had overseen was scrutinized. Liz continued her work, ensuring that all loose ends were tied and that the integrity of Fort Harrow was restored. She had faced emotional challenges, deception, and betrayal, but each trial only reinforced her strength, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to justice. By the end of the month, the base had transformed subtly but profoundly. Trust was rebuilding, respect was being earned, and Liz's quiet leadership had inspired others. Soldiers who had once whispered and doubted now sought her guidance. Her presence was no longer underestimated. It was valued, relied upon, and respected. Yet, even in this moment of vindication, Liz understood that vigilance was never over. Betrayal, she realized, could take many forms, and integrity required constant vigilance. But she also knew that she was stronger for it, capable of confronting deception, navigating challenges, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a small measure of pride. She had faced the shadows of doubt, the weight of underestimation, and the sting of betrayal, and emerged with truth, justice, and the unshakable knowledge of her own strength. The Kraken patch on her vest felt heavier now, but in the best possible. Way. It was no longer just a symbol of elite training. It was a symbol of endurance, of courage, and of a woman who refused to be underestimated, no matter the cost. Weeks had passed since Colonel Brandt's removal, yet Fort Harrow still carried the echoes of the betrayal. Soldiers whispered in hushed tones about the courage of the woman who had confronted authority and uncovered the hidden conspiracy. Liz moved through the base with quiet confidence, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. The Kraken patch on her vest no longer seemed just a symbol, it was a statement. Vigilance, skill, and courage could not be denied. But Liz's journey was far from over. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, the investigation revealed fragments of a larger network. The communications tampering had not originated solely from Brandt. Somewhere beyond Fort Harrow, there were individuals watching, waiting, and possibly planning their next move. The general called her into his office. One crisp morning. "Mercer, I need someone I can trust completely. I want you to lead a small team beyond the base to track down anyone else involved and ensure there's no loose end left." Liz felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. She had already sacrificed sleep, comfort, and emotional stability for the mission, yet she accepted without hesitation. Her eyes met the general's, unwavering. "Understood, sir." The team was smaller this time. Marcus Reed, steady and loyal. Corporal Jensen, sharp-eyed and fearless. And Lieutenant Harris, cautious but resourceful. Together, they formed a unit built on skill, trust, and mutual respect, qualities that Liz valued above rank or tradition. Their investigation led them beyond Fort Harrow, into nearby towns and abandoned facilities where traces of the conspiracy lingered. Every discovery revealed careful planning, patience, and an unsettling awareness of the base's routines. Yet Liz's training, her patience, and her emotional resilience kept her ahead of those who underestimated her. Every obstacle became a test of ingenuity, every risk a measure of courage. One evening, while examining a remote communications hub, Liz uncovered the final piece of evidence: encrypted transmissions, linked to a private contractor with connections inside multiple military installations. This was no longer a local issue. It was a broader network designed to manipulate, exploit, and endanger Dot as she reviewed the data. A sudden noise made her spin around, rifle raised. A figure emerged from the shadows, someone she had trusted. A liaison officer who had seemed supportive from the beginning. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the chest. "Step away from the equipment," Liz commanded, her voice steady but sharp. The officer smirked, arrogance dripping from every word. "You think you've won, Mercer? You've only scratched the surface." Liz's mind raced, but she remained calm. Years of underestimation had taught her that panic was the enemy. Using a combination of tactical movement and strategic positioning, she blocked the officer's path while signaling Marcus to secure the hub systems remotely. Within moments, the officer realized they were trapped. "You've been playing a dangerous game," Liz said softly. "But games have rules, and you just broke them." Security arrived minutes later, taking the officer into custody. Liz stood. In the wet night, rain dripping from her vest, exhausted but resolute. The final threat had been neutralized, the conspiracy exposed, and her team safe. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of her accomplishment, not just as a soldier, but as a person who had endured ridicule, skepticism, and betrayal, only to emerge stronger. Back at Fort Harrow, recognition came quietly, but meaningfully. The general personally commended her for bravery, intelligence, and leadership. Colleagues who had once whispered behind her back now sought her advice and trusted her judgment. Even Sergeant Halvorsen, begrudgingly, nodded in respect. Liz understood that respect and trust could not be demanded. They had to be earned, often at great personal cost. Every sleepless night, every emotional trial, Every moment of doubt had led her to this point. She had proven that courage and integrity were not defined by physical size, gender, or outward demeanor, but by the strength of one's character and the determination to act when others faltered. In the quiet of the evening, Liz stood alone. On the perimeter, the base stretching silently around her. The Kraken patch on her vest gleamed faintly in the setting sun. She ran her fingers over it, feeling a sense of connection to every moment that had shaped her. The mockery, the doubts, the trials, and the victories. A small smile crossed her face. For years, she had been underestimated, dismissed, and ignored. Now, she had the undeniable proof of her strength, not just in skill, but in heart. And as the wind rustled the trees beyond the perimeter, Liz realized something profound. She hadn't just earned respect or justice. She had earned something even rarer, the knowledge that no matter the odds, no matter the deception or betrayal, she would always rise. The base was safe, the conspirators exposed, and the truth restored. Yet Liz knew her journey was far from over. New challenges would come, new threats would emerge. But now, she faced them not as someone underestimated, but as a soldier, a leader, and a force no one could ignore. The Kraken patch was more than a symbol, it was a promise. Vigilance, courage, and strength, forged in the fire of trials, ready to face any darkness ahead. And as Liz Mercer looked toward the horizon, she understood that she had not only survived the shadows, she had become their master. The final twist was clear, satisfying, and undeniable. Those who doubted her would never forget her name, and she had turned every insult, every mockery, and every underestimation into the very fuel that had carried her to victory. Fort Harrow would remember her. And Liz Mercer, once underestimated and dismissed, had claimed her place, not just as a soldier, but as a legend in her own right.